What is going on, guys? My name is Powerbang. Welcome back to the channel. I have an absolute doozy in store for you today. This has been a heavily requested topic. In today's video, I'm going to be breaking down some extremely reliable methods and little known methods at that to help identify where your opponents are before you can even see them. And more importantly, before they see you. Alright guys, welcome to the video. First off, before we get into how to actually track down your enemies, it's important to understand the science and actual calculations that are happening behind the scenes of PUBG Mobile, or really any game for that matter. So let's first talk a little bit about the actual game mechanics. Apologies to those of you that don't want to get nerdy with me for just a minute. You guys can skip ahead in the video if you like. I'm sure you'll find the information you're looking for in just a little bit. First off, open world games or MMOs are typically set in kind of a massive open environment or world, so to speak, which would be very difficult for your device to quote unquote see all of the terrain and all of the people in that terrain at the same time. And by see, I mean actively load in and track in real time each and every player's location, their movement, their position, and many other factors that are subconscious to you when you are actually playing the game. While these may be subconscious things, these situations and behaviors still need to be programmed into the code for computers that ultimately broadcast the signal to your device via the game app. Now, because of the technical challenges introduced by having a game with so many players and such a large playing area, it becomes necessary to optimize the load placed on the player devices and even make the server itself, which hosts the multiplayer game, more efficient. Now, these optimizations will decrease latency, which is what you guys often see as lag or ping, and also it will increase frame rates, which is the smoothness that you observe while playing. Now, an easy way to reduce the demand on a device is to set the render distance in the code. This essentially makes it so players and even terrain beyond X meters are not visible to your player, and that particular content does not load into the game at all for you. That is, until you've approached close enough to make the content that you're currently missing out on relevant. Things like gunshots being audible in the distance, or players existing in your field of view that are within visible distance to the naked eye. Now that we understand how to limit the load placed on the server and also the devices themselves, let's talk a bit how the game accomplishes this smoothly without impacting your experience as a player. Each player in the game has specific coordinates where they exist on the map or the playing area. Think of it like X and Y coordinates or even rows and columns. Pings from the server are regularly sent to every single connected device to receive their updated coordinates on a very frequent basis. The game server then quickly calculates which players are then close to each other. If player A is within X meters of player B, the game will then load his character model, track his player movements in real time, etc. This is what allows players to be able to see others, to take aim on them, fire, ultimately landing shots on target and getting kills. Character models that are outside of a certain distance from your character will not render N. You cannot see them, and certainly you can't shoot them either. They essentially don't exist for the purpose of your first-hand experience. Now, as the play zone shrinks, they'll be loaded into the game later on when you're closer together. From many observations in the game, many encounters with players that are at a really far distance away, the distance is somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 meters. Now, this is with a 4x scope attached, and you're zooming in, and all of a sudden the player disappears. They are going out of render distance, and the distance is likely less than 400 meters if you're not using any optic enhancements or the naked eye as you're running with your gun out. Once a player runs beyond the distance of approximately 400 meters, they will simply disappear from view, which surely has frustrated a few snipers that are watching this video that just needed to land one more hit with their weapon to secure that long distance kill. So for the purpose of this video, we know that this information somehow will help me determine where my enemies are. Well, yes, let's hop into a map with examples that demonstrate exactly how to do this. First, we're gonna make the assumption that the render distance is just under, say, 400 meters. It could actually be a little bit less than this, meaning that your enemies are actually closer to you, but for the sake of lack of evidence, we'll assume that models are loaded in when less than 400 meters away. Now, at the center of the player map is always you. Your character model is always the center of the universe as far as your device is concerned. Everything else is being loaded into the game for your experience is relative to your position. Your position is represented by the yellow dot. In addition to the yellow dot, there is also a very large yellow circle that encompasses your dot. It's the same distance around and the radius is the same on all sides. This is the indicator for your render distance. When enemy players load into your renderable play area, there is a very noticeable stutter or a lag that happens on your device. Now, as you become accustomed to looking for this spike and this drop in frame rate, you'll begin to notice it much more easily as you gain more experience. A couple of key points to consider before we discuss this any further. For a player to be rendered into your playable area, one or more things has to be true. You must be moving towards your enemy, the enemy must be moving towards you, or a combination of both of these scenarios. You could be moving towards each other. Because of these facts, we'll always have burned into our heads that the render radius extends beyond our current position up to 400 meters in every direction. We are going to first start with simple scenarios where the only consideration is you and stationary opposing players. That means no duos or squad members to take into account, and the enemies are not moving in any direction. They're camping buildings, waiting for something to shoot at. Now, due to basic geometry, the most likely zone you're going to see enemies in is the green zone directly in front of your character. It's less likely, but not uncommon, that they'll exist adjacent to the green zone in the yellow zones. For the first examples, our enemies are stationary, so the zones behind us are not applicable, but you could experience the render stutter effect if opposing players were in a vehicle and driving towards your position from behind you at a faster rate of speed than you were running away from them. Hopefully that makes sense. So back to your player. You're running along, and all of a sudden your screen lags. You stutter a little bit, and you get that, you've got that render effect. And then all of a sudden it goes back to normal. Well, that means that the player models have loaded in, and you're back to having them on your screen somewhere. You're just not sure where yet. Now, should you ignore it and continue on? No! Pay attention, this is the render effect that I've just been talking about. You've been given some key information here. So we'll freeze it right here and analyze our position and movement to give us more information about where our enemies might be. What buildings, compounds, or places of interest on the map just came into our render radius that may be a great spot to hang out in, or loot up if you were an enemy? You see a couple of options? Good, because I do too. Those are where you're gonna wanna focus your attention first as you approach an area. Realize that the highest probability of enemies exists in the green zone in the general direction that you are running. Aha, there's a player in the window looking right at you. Is he inside the radius though of your render? Yes, he is. Is he in a popular area or a building? Yes, he is. Great, you just got a jump on him. Whereas if you had run up to this compound unaware of his presence, if you had not paid attention to the render effect, you surely would have been gunned down without ever knowing he was there. Anytime you're running along and you get a lag or a stutter, otherwise known as the render effect, stop and take notice. Realize that 99% of the time you're running towards the enemy position, and you should be on high alert for an encounter in the coming moments. Now let's add a little bit more depth to this hypothetical situation and say that you're playing squads and you have multiple opponents to consider. More importantly, you have teammates to consider now. Realize that you guys can combine your information on the render effect to effectively triangulate the position of your enemies with a pretty high degree of accuracy. First, let's point out that there are varying degrees of the render effect. A small lag spike or a frame spike is indicative of a small amount of data being loaded onto your device, and that typically means 1 or 2 players. A larger lag spike is indicative of a higher amount of data, maybe a full squad that's in close proximity to one another. Finally, there is extreme render, which basically makes your game unplayable for a moment while all of the players are loaded in. You'll typically experience these extreme effects with, say, 20 to 25 players remaining that are all heading towards a final circle or a final play zone from various angles of the map, and once everybody arrives to one of the final zones, they're all close enough to each other to render end, and you get this huge lag spike. The demand on the device is quite large at that point. Paying attention to the size of the lag spike can help you determine what the actual threat is. Is there 1 or 2 players, or is there multiple squads? When you're taking teammates into account, it's key to understand that each of you has your own render radius. It's not the same, it's not, as a group. Each player has their own. It's the same size for each person, and if 2 of you are running west and the northernmost player experiences the render effect before the player to the south, you now have data that tells you that there are enemies to your north, and both players should start to head in that direction to deal with the threat. The time between render effects for you and your teammates can also give you the angle at which the enemies exist if you stop and think about it for a moment. If the render effects from you and your teammates are extremely close together, both in timing and positioning, the enemies will almost certainly exist in the direction that is directly in front of where you're running. Just keep going a little bit and you're gonna run into them. If one player gets the rendering effect and then a few seconds go by and then the other player gets it, you're likely going to have to veer off to an angle a bit more towards the person who experienced the render effect first, as they were obviously closer to the target. As you can see from the radiuses radiuses themselves, as you trace them away from directly in front of you, the radiuses actually will get further and further apart the further to the side you go. So it's very important to realize how far away each of the effects were. The closer together they are, it's going to be directly in front of you. The farther the effects are away from each other, you need to start veering off to the side. Make sure you guys veer towards the person who had the effect first. Now here's some common questions that I get all the time with regards to the rendering effect. Does my device and internet connection matter? Will it be worse or better depending on how good or new of a device that I actually have? Yes, a higher powered device with a better processor, that's the key component, is the processor speed, will always process data more efficiently. And that is essentially what the core of the issue is here, is data. The more data that is sent up and downstream, the more you're going to render or spike in lag or frames. Those that have a slower internet connection could theoretically also have their connection temporarily bogged down from temporarily receiving more data than usual, although the device processing speed is a much more crucial factor. Suffice it to say that the rendering effects are more noticeable in lower end, less powerful devices. Although, I can still easily feel render effects on my device, which is an iPhone X, a device with one of the most powerful processors on the market. From experience, we've also noticed that iPads don't feel this effect as easily and are less likely to pick up on this render effect, although it is still present in tablets and other devices. Is this render effect hacking or cheating? No, it is simply an inefficiency in the game code itself. The load being placed on your device is noticeable during certain situations, and you being observant and applying some quick math skills to help reverse engineer some coordinates is definitely not taking advantage of any exploit or modifying the game files in any way to gain an advantage. Lastly, will PUBG Mobile always be like this? Now, until PUBG Mobile better optimizes their netcode and their game data to be processed and handled a bit more efficiently, you're not likely to see less render or lag in game. This is one of the big reasons that Sandhawk specifically experiences a ton of lag compared to the other maps. It is deemed unplayable by many players that have lower end devices. The map is small and it's constantly loading in new players that are coming from all angles. Itself is laggy. Try to keep in mind what this lag actually means and then use it to your advantage. I wasn't sure that I was going to release this information to the masses, as you can see how sensitive it is and how it could help give you a tremendous advantage in game, but you know I'll do anything for the Banger Nation. You guys now are all at least on the same level playing field as we are, so hopefully you guys have enjoyed this information. Make sure to smack the like button, share this video with your friends, your fellow PUBG Mobile players, and subscribe to the channel for more PUBG Mobile tips and tricks. This is Powerbang. I'm out of here. Till next time, we'll see you guys soon.